Hey, great to have you back today on Set Sail with Grace Harbor. Today is February the 16th, and we're covering Leviticus chapter 11 through 13. Today we get to one of our favorite parts, Leviticus, right? What's clean, what's not clean. I know you've all been waiting for this one. First of all, I'd like to say thank God for providing Jesus to cleanse us from our unrighteousness, because these laws don't play well in our society. I still run across people, Christians in fact, that feel we're still to obey these laws today. And at the risk of offending some people out there, I'm going to say that I disagree. But you're going to need to wait to the end of the video for me to give you my reason for that. So just hang with me. In chapter 11, is a description of all the dietary laws concerning what animals are clean to eat and what's not. If you're a vegetarian back then, I guess you're okay. But those of you on the carnivore diet, you might want to pay attention to this if you were of Israel back then. We read all about the different animals and the different insects. And what was it that made some of them clean and some of them not? It's a good question. Some of the scholars that I looked up on this subject, they're wide in their interpretations of this scripture. Some say it was to protect the Israelites from foodborne illnesses and diseases. Perhaps that's true. Some say it was to promote healthy eating, or things tasted bad, or it just wasn't fit for human consumption, and the list goes on. I don't know if any of those things are the real reason, but they're more speculative, it seems like, than what the scripture actually says. You couldn't even touch some animals that were unclean if they died, or even clean animals if they were dead, because you would become unclean in the process. So why some clean and others are not? Well, the only reason I can really say for sure is God said so. To make a distinction between the clean and unclean, what can be eaten and what cannot be eaten, it's that simple. God said these were the ones. In chapter 12, we move on to the purification laws concerning childbirth. Now, I have to give a disclaimer here. I'm a male. I have absolutely no personal experience with any of the conditions discussed here that involve women specifically. So, ladies, forgive me if I say something that doesn't make sense from my male perspective, but that's what I've got to work with here. I'll just say in full disclosure, I don't have any recollection of circumcision either. So there's that to deal with. But it appears that the purification process is a fairly straightforward section here, in that it describes what is required during this process. However, there also appears to be some discrepancies between the length of time after childbirth for a male child versus a female child. I've heard all kinds of reasons for this. It could be left over from the consequences of Eve's sin in the garden and her desire to rule over her husband, or since women are the ones who bear children, and a female child will also possibly bear children, then perhaps the time is doubled for that reason. I can't really say for sure. I just know what I've read, and I know what is there in the Word. It's 33 days for a male, and it's 66 for females. I don't really understand why God made the distinction, but He did, and that's what I do know. In chapter 13, it brings us to the laws concerning leprosy. But it was very, very serious, often contagious by contact, and it was a very slow and painful way to die. We tend to imagine the worst and most extreme cases when we hear the word, even today. But looking at the list of the things that the priest checked for, seems like it could have been anything from acne to ingrown toenails or ingrown hairs, any spots that appeared on the skin. They were all subject to close scrutiny and observation, and whether one could be declared leprous or not. And if they were put outside the camp sort of a quarantine for a period of time, and re-examined until a declaration could be made whether they were leprous or not. So it seems a little cruel and harsh since most of the affected people probably didn't choose this. So why? Why, God, did this happen? And why pick on these people? Well, he doesn't answer it. Not here. And just remember, when we read about Job, Job never got an answer to his question of why either. So in chapter 13, we move on to the different ways the priests are to determine clean from unclean and what has to be dealt with. And it's important to note that being in a state of uncleanness is not a sin. It just means I have come in contact with something that God says was unclean. And so for a temporary period of time, I have become unclean. And because of that, I have to deal with that and go through the process of becoming clean to follow God's commandments. In all of these things that we've looked at today, God prescribes what has to happen for one to be restored to cleanliness. Even the lepers that we will see in chapter 14 that comes tomorrow. So what's the big deal about clean versus unclean anyway? Well, the key is back in chapter 11, verse 44. God says, "Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am holy." So no one can approach God in an unclean state because he's holy. And that is the reason for the difference between the clean and unclean, because he's called them to be set apart as a holy nation, and he's called each person in the nation to strive for holiness to come before him. God takes it very seriously, and it's one of the primary ways that he elevates the children of Israel above all the other nations to show that they're his chosen people. So the question that was at the beginning of this video was, do we have to keep all the dietary laws today? The answer is in Acts 10, 10 through 16. God declared them clean. Remember the vision that Peter had of the sheet coming down with all these animals on it, and God told him to eat. And he protested at first, but then he relented because God had commanded it. Now, why is it okay? Well, because when Jesus died on the cross and his blood was shed for our sin, it did away with all of these offerings. That's why we don't have to do them today. So all things were made clean. Maybe not practical. I mean, I'm not going to eat crickets anytime soon or locusts or anything like that. But because of that, I sure am thankful because bacon is still on my menu. Join us again tomorrow and we'll learn more about what Leviticus has to teach us. Bye-bye.